Have you always wanted to have a garden full of delicious vegetables or beautiful flowers, but didn't quite know how to get started? This is your chance to learn, because we're going to be starting a garden from scratch, from sod to this beautiful garden, today on The Joy of Gardening. Hi, I'm Dave Schaefer, your host for The Joy of Gardening. Beautiful gardens like this one don't just happen. For years, probably centuries, this was just a patch of weedy soil. But where do you begin? How do you start? Today, Mark Hebert is going to show us how to turn almost any patch of soil, including your backyard, into a lush and bountiful garden. Mark, when's the best time to start?
Well, Dave, how about right now? It doesn't really matter when you start gardening, spring, summer, fall, or winter. Basically, any time you can work the soil. The important thing is to get going. Everyone's backyard is different depending on where you live, but that doesn't matter because the principles of gardening are the same the world over. Stay with us, and we'll be right back to show you how easy it is to start a garden from scratch. As you can see, I've got plenty of room, but most people have a limited amount of space to start with. But that doesn't mean you can't be selective. Now, as an example, I've chosen this plot of land for my garden because it's practically ideal. How do I know that? Well, for one thing, sun. South is in that direction, and that means it gets full sunlight practically all day long. It's not shaded by trees, buildings, or even the fence. Now, if you have a choice, use a gentle south-facing slope because it provides good drainage and plenty of sun. And finally, there are personal considerations. Your garden spot should be compatible with your family's uses, and it should be aesthetically pleasing too. Okay, so you've thought about all these things, and you've chosen your spot. It's time to dig right in, right? Well, not quite. Even though you might be tempted to break out the shovel, the first thing you want to do is lay out the garden. A few stakes and some string can be one of your handiest garden tools. Use it to keep edges straight and neat, or to mark your rows. A knot every foot or two can make it a quick and easy measuring device. Now we're ready to dig in, and there are a couple of ways you can go about it. A lot of you will be starting with a lawn, so if you plan on gardening right away, remove the sod. Cut it into strips with a spade. Just a few inches deep is all you need. I think a spade works best for this, but if you don't have one, a shovel will work fine. Peel up a thin layer of sod by severing the roots, like so. This is where a flat spade really comes in handy. Shake off any topsoil clinging to the roots. Now give them a good shake, because this soil is the richest and best in the garden. And don't throw this sod away. Use it to fill in bare spots in your lawn, or pile it out of the way, roots side up, and let it decompose. If you're preparing your soil well in advance of planting, a few weeks or so, you won't have to remove the sod like this. Just turn it over and let it decompose right in the garden. Stripping sod is hard work, but the next step is easy. Organic matter, or humus, is the key to healthy soil because it provides essential nutrients and helps hold moisture. For me, organic matter means dead leaves from last autumn. Just spread them over the garden and turn them under. Organic matter improves the structure of any type of soil too. It helps open up hard clay soils so they can breathe and holds loose, sandy soils together. Truth is, any soil can use a big dose of organic matter every year. The best organic matter is the one that's easiest for you to get. I have a friend down the road who owns a farm. He'll let me take a load of nutrient-rich manure practically anytime I want. Now, don't use fresh manure because the ammonia may burn tender seeds and plants, and it's full of weed seeds just waiting to sprout. Use aged manure, at least a year old, for best results and fewer weeds. And for some people, adding organic matter means a trip to the garden store for a bag of peat moss. Whatever you use, be generous and work it into the soil evenly. This is a good time to get to know your soil. While you're turning it over, make sure you break up clods and loosen it the full depth of the shovel. I prefer a shovel for turning the soil. The longer handle is easier on my back. Right here is the foundation of a great garden. Soil teeming with life. Millions of microscopic plants and animals in every handful. Healthy soil is a blend of minerals, air, moisture, microorganisms, and organic matter. Stay tuned and I'll be right back to show you how to plan and plant your garden. It's been raining all morning long here, and that's good because these warm spring rains really help wake up the soil and get things going. And I like to take advantage of a rainy day to plan my garden. You don't just go out and plant it, you take a look at it on paper first. Here's my garden with the rows filled in. Notice I've got the north indicated here. That's because I want to keep my tallest plants toward the north or east edge of the garden so they don't shade the lower growing plants. Browsing through a seed catalog or a visit to a garden store can be really helpful in making your choices. Finally, it's time to plant. And basically, there are just two ways to get started, with seeds and with transplants. Starting from seeds is the most common way to get planting. You can grow anything from seeds if your growing season is long enough. But for some vegetables, it makes sense to start with transplants, and I'll get to these in a minute. Right here, I'm going to plant green snap beans, one of my favorites. Now, the seed packets say to plant all your vegetables in skinny, single-file rows, and that's fine, but I'm going to show you a better way, growing in super productive wide rows. In a single-row garden, most of the soil is used unproductively for walkways, but in a wide-row garden, it's just the opposite. They look like they're practically solid vegetables. So here's how to plant a wide row using seeds. First, we need a nice loose seed bed, and we've got that. And now I'm going to stretch a string, good and tight here, to mark the row. Put it in good and solid. Next, I take this ordinary garden rake, and I'll draw it along this string. Now, this removes rocks and debris, and it also marks the width of the wide row. I'm going to flip the rake over and just level it out so I get an absolutely perfect seed bed. Now notice how the width of the rake has marked the width of the row that I'm going to plant. Now I'm going to sprinkle the seeds along the length and width of the row. Now, these are the contender snap beans that are very good. You'll notice that they're pink. That means they're covered with a mild fungicide called Captan. Just like this. Oh, you're looking for a spacing anywhere from 2 to 4 inches apart. You don't really have to be too careful because if they're too thick, you can always thin them later. But if they're too thin, it's a little tougher to tuck them in later on. Just like here. There we go. Now I'll firm those seeds into the soil because we want them to make good contact. Firm, moist soil is the thing that gets these seeds going. So we want to pat them in. Next, I'll take the rake and I'll pull soil over the seeds like this. Now, fine seeds like lettuce only require, a 1/4 of an inch of soil, but these big bean seeds will need an inch or more. Now, I flip the rake over, just sort of level level the soil, continue down the row. This sort of makes like a soil blanket. Keeps them warm, provides the moisture that they need. But actually, this soil is pretty dry. Now, I take the hoe and firm them in. There we go. Now that was pretty easy, wasn't it? Now since the soil is dry, I'm going to make sure they get a good drink of water. Transplants are nothing more than seeds with a head start. They're a great way to extend your growing season. Here's what I mean. These pepper plants are already 8 weeks old, but it'll still take another 8 weeks of warm weather to mature fruit after what I hope is the last frost. With my short growing season, I'd be lucky to have any peppers at all starting from seeds. Now you can grow your own transplants or you can buy them from your local garden store or nursery. But if you buy them, here's what to look for. Healthy plants are a dark green, and they have thick, strong stems, and they're not bothered by insects or diseases. But be sure to check the undersides of the leaves for bugs before you bring them home with you. Transplanting is really quite easy. Just make sure you treat them like babies, because that's just what they are. First, you want to start with an extra deep planting hole. Now this soil's good and loose, so that's easy to do with my hand. Now I'm going to add just a teaspoonful of a complete fertilizer. A complete fertilizer gives your plants the 3 essential nutrients they need for a good start: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and it's readily available at almost any garden store. Be sure you cover it with soil because you don't want the roots to come in contact with that fertilizer or they'll burn. Now, be sure you give your flat a good soaking of water. The water protects the roots and keeps them from drying out. Now, this is the type of flat that you find at a lot of garden stores. Oh, there's 6 or 7 plants in here, and the roots are all massed together. So when you remove them, you want to be very careful that you don't damage the roots, either of the plant you're taking out or of the surrounding plants. Boy, that one's really tough. Cradle the roots in your hand because the more these plant roots are exposed, the more will die and the less nutrients this plant will be able to take up. Now, plant it immediately at the same depth it grew in the flat. And tuck it in here firmly but gently. Finally, give it a good soaking of water. Now, a lot of people like to use a water-soluble fertilizer at this point instead of compost or dry fertilizer, and that's just fine. That was easy, wasn't it? Wide rows are great for transplants, so I'll finish planting this row by adding 1 here. That makes 2. Then 1 more in the center, then 2, then 1 in a series of triangles along the row. This pattern lets me plant a lot more in a lot less space. Now, not everything is a seed or a transplant. There are onion sets, garlic cloves, potato tubers, and horseradish roots. Just remember that all their needs are similar: fertile, healthy soil and a steady supply of moisture. It's mid-season now, and these beans I planted are doing just great. And these peppers, they're doing fine too. Now let's take a look at what I planted in the rest of the garden. In the back row, because they grow so tall, are pole beans. They'll climb right up those strings on the trellis. Next, there are tomatoes. They're planted single file because the plants grow bushy and form sort of a wide row of their own. Now a row of vine crops: zucchini, summer squash, and here with this trellis for support, a short section of cucumbers. Here's a wide row of cole crops: cabbage, cauliflower, and broccoli. Some eggplant and chard share the pepper row. Here's those snap beans. A row of root crops, carrots and beets, and here in the front, a salad row. 2 kinds of lettuce, onions, and garlic. I grow everything I need for a salad right here. By cultivating occasionally to keep the weeds down and providing a steady supply of moisture, I've transformed this once grassy area into a productive vegetable garden. Here's the best part of having a garden in the first place. Fresh, tender, and tasty vegetables just waiting to be picked and enjoyed. So remember to harvest. Harvesting isn't a once-a-season chore. It's a constant grooming that forces your plants to produce more. If there's something to eat, pick it. It took just a short time to go from sod to this lush garden. So starting from scratch isn't difficult. And I think you'll agree it can be more rewarding than you ever imagined.
I have a couple of homemade gadgets in my garden shed that have saved me a lot of time and effort, and they're simple rainy day projects for the shop. For example, it only takes a couple of minutes to make these measuring stakes, but they'll save you a lot of time when you lay out your garden. The idea is simple. Use stakes that will help you lay out wide rows, measure distances, and carry enough cord to be useful for a variety of gardening and landscaping projects. These stakes cost 39 cents each at a garden store. I chose these because they're cut into 2-foot lengths. Why 2 feet? Well, I use this stake as a measuring stick, and 2 feet's a handy length. For example, I've attached a cleat here at 18 inches because I use a power tiller for cultivation during the summer. I want 18-inch walkways between rows. That allows me a couple of extra inches so I don't damage the crops during cultivation. For sprawling crops, I want 4 feet between rows. That's just 2 lengths of stake. A little cleat like this, cut out of scrap lumber, holds enough cord for the longest row in my garden. Drill a couple of holes in the stake and just screw it on. I find it's handy for laying out rows of berry bushes, setting out bulbs in the fall, even planting rows of Christmas tree seedlings. Now, another project from my shop helps me keep my tools in good shape. This little paddle-shaped thing is called a man. I keep it right inside the shed door next to my tools. It's used to scrape the mud off your garden tools before you bring them indoors. You can cut it from a scrap of hardwood. Just make your first cut at a 45-degree angle to form a wedge, and then cut a handle that's comfortable. And finally, here's a simple way of beating rust. Simply fill a wooden box or wash tub with sand and give it a permanent place near your tools. At the end of every season, I drain the oil from my power mower and other power equipment and empty it into this sand. That solves the disposal problem. And before putting tools away, I work them around in this mixture. It not only cleans them off, but it coats them with a thin layer of oil, and that prevents rust. A little time and effort spent in the workshop on a rainy day can spare you lots of time and money later. Hi, Janet. Here's the cauliflower you asked for.
Oh, it's beautiful. Thanks, Dave.
You know, it must be hard to come up with ideas for making new dishes from the same vegetables.
Oh, no, not at all. For example, I'm going to whip up a horseradish cream sauce for this cauliflower and a sweet mustard glaze for these carrots.
Sounds good, but it also sounds like a lot of work.
Oh, sauces aren't a lot of work, and they really dress up your vegetables. Stick with me, and I'll show you how. Fresh garden vegetables are wonderful all by themselves, but towards the middle of the summer, you start wanting something with a little different taste. So here's a way to make your dishes fancier without spending hours in the kitchen. Try vegetable sauces. I'm going to show you how to make a basic white sauce and then how to vary it with different flavorings. White sauce is nothing more than equal amounts of butter and flour blended together with some milk or other liquid added. I've melted 2 tablespoons of butter in this saucepan. Now I'll sprinkle on 2 tablespoons of flour and stir it around to make a smooth paste. Keep the heat on low to make sure the butter doesn't burn. Next, I'll add a cup of milk, pouring in just a little at a time and stirring constantly to keep it from lumping up. The sauce gets thicker at first, but when you add more liquid, it thins down. Now, the standard white sauce uses just milk, but here's a way to add some extra flavor. Add a little white wine to it. Vegetable or chicken broth is very good, too, if you have some on hand, and the sauce will thicken as it cooks. You cook it for 3 to 5 minutes to get rid of the raw flour taste or until it's just the right consistency. There. That's all there is to it. You can use this just as it is for any creamed vegetables, onions for instance. I'm going to make this into a delicious hot horseradish sauce that's wonderful on cauliflower. I'll just add 4 teaspoons of prepared horseradish and a teaspoon of Dijon mustard and some salt and a little white pepper. My hot horseradish sauce is done now. As I said, it only took a few minutes to make. I'll pour it over these cauliflower heads that I steamed, and then sprinkle on a little parsley. Doesn't that look great? Here's a sauce that's really quick to make and good on all kinds of vegetables. Sweet mustard glaze. I've melted 3 tablespoons of butter in this frying pan. Now I'll add a tablespoon of Dijon mustard and a tablespoon of honey or maple syrup. If you dip your measuring spoon in some butter first, it's easier to pour the honey or syrup. Stir it until it's smooth, and then put in your steamed vegetables. I've got some sliced carrots here for it. Toss them until they're coated and serve them nice and hot. That only took a few seconds, and it's a wonderful way to dress up these carrots.
Thank you, Janet. That looks like a tasty and time-saving idea. As Mark says, you can start your garden anytime you can work the soil. Be sure you pick a spot that's well-drained and gets at least 6 hours of sunshine a day. Then, once you turn over the soil, you're on your way to a great garden. I'm Dave Schaefer, and I hope you'll join us again next week for more of The Joy of Gardening.